Hey guys, it's Bree here at Blossom and Branch Farm, and I hate plastic seed trays. I'm just going to come out and say it, I hate them. And with the rise in recycled plastics, which is recycled black electronics plastic that is often treated with things like flame retardants, the fact is that there's the potential for a lot of chemicals to be leaching into our food because we're growing these things in moisture and heat, which is the exact recipe for leaching those things into soil. That's why I hate plastic seed trays. But what are the alternatives? You guys have heard me talk a lot on this channel about soil blocking, and I do love soil blocking because it lets me conserve a lot of space. But there's another option too, and that is wood seed trays. Now, we started doing wooden seed trays 2 years ago. I was actually inspired by a fellow Instagrammer called Stacking Functions who was showing these on his page, and I thought, there's no way these work that well. I tried it, and wow, they work so well because they hold moisture like a champ. So if you have a life outside of your garden, and most of you probably do, unlike me, the wood trays are great because they are much easier to keep moist. So whereas where we're dealing with soil blocks that dry out really quickly and easily, wood trays hold their moisture really well because, as you can see, it's a giant tray full of soil. It holds moisture great. So this means we don't have to pay as much attention to it, and yet things still grow really, really well. So we've been trialing these now for a couple of years. I'm really happy with how they do. And honestly, if I could, I would grow 100% in these wood trays. There are still some times that I use soil blocks, and I do still use them because I grow literally thousands and thousands of seedlings, and I need to conserve my space in my 6x8 greenhouse. But if I was only growing maybe a couple of hundred, I would definitely grow 100% in these wood trays. Now, this is not a novel idea, by the way. People have been growing in wood trays for a long time. So what did they used to do before the invention of plastic 6-pack seed cell trays? They grew in wood trays, and they would scoop out the plants, send them home wrapped up in burlap or some damp newspaper. That was it. It was not so complicated as we might be making it. So today I'm going to show you how to build these. I'm also going to show you how to treat them so that they can be more waterproof using Shou Sugi Ban, which is a Japanese method of charring the wood. And I'm going to give you a couple tips along the way. What wood do you want to use for these? You could really use anything. I choose to use cedar just because cedar is the most rot resistant, obviously. That's why we use it for raised beds. Now, these seed trays are sitting empty for most of the year. You know, maybe they have seeds in them for 4 months out of the year, but for the other 8 months, I'm letting these dry out. So really, they're not as prone to rot as, say, for example, a raised bed would be. And you can do Shou Sugi Ban with your raised beds as well. Again, these are going to hold up a lot better than you think because they are drying out in between uses. So I've got my cedar here, and I mentioned that we use scraps, and some of these scraps are a little bit warped. You can see that this one isn't exactly flat. That's totally okay. This wood tray, actually, we made with some scrap wood from our patio roof that you see behind me. They did cedar tongue and groove up there, and we saved some pieces, and we used cedar tongue and groove for the bottom of this tray. So it really actually fits together quite nicely. So if you have access to tongue and groove, you could use that. That's what we use to make this tray. But for this one that I'm going to be showing you, these are just cedar 1x8s. I'm going to put a link below to a downloadable plan that you can grab if you want to download the plans for these wood trays with 2 different sizes. So these are 1x8s, like I mentioned. These are going to form the bottom of the tray. Then I have what's going to be the sides. So I have 2 shorter pieces. These are 1x4s. So I have 2 short pieces that are going to form this end and this end. And then I have 2 longer pieces that are going to form this sides. So I'm going to start by putting these together. Now, I am terrible with tools, so I'm going to be calling things all the wrong terminology and names. Listen, this is not a construction channel, okay? Let's adjust expectations here. I am but a lowly farmer, but I do know that I need to drill a pilot hole with a bit, because if I don't use this, my wood will likely split. In fact, it might split anyway, and that's okay, by the way. It's not the end of the world if your wood does split. So here we go. Pilot holes is what we're gonna start with. So we're gonna do 2 pilot holes here. And yes, I'm just eyeballing it. And then I'm gonna take a couple of wood screws. I am using 1 1/4 inch deck screws. And I'll just pop those guys in. 1 and 2. So even if you don't know how to build stuff like me, You could probably build this tray. All right, and then we'll do the other side. And then last one. Then we're gonna flip it over and we'll attach it to the base. So I've got my square. Now I'm gonna attach this to the base. So I'm gonna pop my bottoms on here. Again, these boards are a little bit warpy, not the end of the world. So you could use any kind of scrap lumber for this. Often people will post lumber on Craigslist, like old scrap fences, or even old raised beds that they're getting rid of. And I know people are often concerned about the pressure treated lumber. You really don't need to be concerned about that anymore. That was a bigger concern pre the year 2000 when they used to use arsenic in treated lumber. That is not used anymore. So again, it's okay if you get a split, guys. It's not the end of the world. Happens usually, especially when I'm working with warped boards like this. All right, there we go. We've got our box. The last step is to attach our handles. So I've just got two little scrap pieces here. It just really makes it much nicer when we're lifting these trays to have little handles. I'm gonna do two because if we just do one, the handle can twist. So drill my pilot. Okay, there's our wood seed tray. So again, that took me about 5 minutes to make, and my building skills are quite rudimentary at best. That's being generous even, I'd say. So it can be done. Now, step 2 is to do our Shou Sugi Ban. So again, you can do this with a raised bed as well. I'm only gonna treat the inside of this tray actually just for the sake of time. You could treat the outside as well, but I'm more concerned about the inside because that's where the moisture is gonna be. So I've got my torch here. This is just a propane torch, hand operated, just clicks on like that. And the trick when we're doing Shou Sugi Ban is that we do want to get a good char on the wood. Please make sure that you have a water source nearby. I have a hose sitting right there and a bucket of water as well. So now that we've got it all charred, you can see I've got the inside is all nicely charred and dark. In fact, it's still smoking. I'm gonna take a brush, so a stiff bristle brush. We're gonna brush off the char, and that's just gonna help our next step adhere. And it also will just kind of knock off any of this loose stuff on here. In the final waterproofing step, and not everybody does this in Shou Sugi Ban. Apparently, some people skip the oil step, but because this is going to be in contact with moist soil, the oil really does help to waterproof it. Now, I'm gonna do this once, and then next year, next spring, before I use this tray again, I'm going to re-oil it because I have found that after a season that oil wears off, and then I need to re-oil. I am using boiled linseed oil to do this. Then comes the last step, which is filling the tray. Now, this is the part where I like to use the sheep's wool. So I started using this. This was last year when I actually was thinking about these trays and how can I keep them from leaking. So while they really don't leak unless you're over watering them, in which case, you know, a plastic tray would leak too. But if I was thinking about, you know, is there something I can put on the bottom to help with that? So I have all this extra sheep wool sitting around, raw wool. You can see it's unwashed, it's just totally raw. I'm gonna use this to line the bottom of my tray. If you don't have access to raw wool, or if you can't find any, Etsy sometimes has some. This is an alternative. So this is a product from Sustain a Grow in New Zealand, and this is just felted raw wool. And so we could cut this to size in our tray and place this in the bottom. I'm gonna show both ways. So first I'm gonna show with the sheep wool, I'm gonna pull it apart and place it into the bottom of my tray. This is a slow release nitrogen. Once those roots reach down to the wool, they take off. Now I'm just topping that sheep's wool with some potting soil. I'm using the Coco Loco that I always use for seed starting with nothing else added to it, just straight Coco Loco. Doesn't need anything else added because that wool is at the bottom. And yes, seeds will germinate in this just fine, don't worry. Okay, bring it almost to the top because it does settle a little bit as we water it. So these are top, we do top water these. Obviously bottom watering, not gonna work so well with these. And make sure you water and wet the soil before you seed. Then I'm gonna make my division. So The divisions that you make kind of depend on the seed that you're starting in here. Now, if I'm starting something larger like tomatoes, I make these bigger because I don't want to have to pot up from here. I want to grow things out in here until they're ready. So think about how big a tomato pot you'd typically plant out would be, maybe about this wide, and you would make these that wide. So that's the nice thing about these trays is they're very customizable to whatever you're growing. Now for these, I'm probably going to be starting either snapdragons or maybe stock in here, which I grew in the trays last year. And in fact, I forgot to transplant them out in time and they flowered in the trays and looked great. Because of this wool in there, I think they really didn't need anything beyond what was in the tray. That being said, that's not ideal. I am going to try to transplant these out. So now that I've got these all in here, I'm dividing them up. So I just am taking this putty knife. This is just the one that you'd use for, you know, drywall or patching. And I'm just making little cuts. Now these divisions aren't necessarily going to hold. So because we are overhead watering, like we mentioned, this is probably not going to stay this nicely divided, but it is nice for when we're spacing our seeds. As we're growing them, if we do want them to stay divided, just take your little putty knife and every couple of days you can just go ahead and make these divisions again. But see, as I water, I mean, they will kind of go together a little bit. Not too bad, but as I water over a couple of days, they will. So again, just take your little putty knife and just go back in again like this. Now, if you're looking for a fully plastic-free option, you can make these beeswax coated fabric pieces. So this is just cotton, and this is great because you can cut them exactly to the size of your seed trays. So this was just cotton I bought. I just cut the edges with pinking shears to keep them from fraying. And then I buy beeswax pastilles, which are the little tiny pieces of beeswax. Sprinkle them on. You'll want to line a cookie sheet with foil before you do this. Put the fabric on top of that cookie sheet that's lined with foil, and then sprinkle your beeswax pastilles over that. Pop it in the oven at about 200 until you see them melt. Then if you need to spread them out, you can take a little pastry brush and just spread them out with that. But usually they spread on their own. No, you don't have to flip it over and do the other side. It soaks all the way through. And then you have a custom little humidity dome. So if you want to be totally plastic free, you can do that. If you have scrap plastic sitting around, everything comes wrapped in plastic these days. So you could just save your old soil bags or old wrappings from, you know, whatever it is, and just put that over the top as well. So, but I like these because they fit just right and perfectly onto my trays, and then they're ready to go. Now, when it's time for transplanting, you'll need a knife. It's usually the first couple that are the hardest to get out, and you'll also need a spoon. So you're gonna cut out your seedling as you go to transplant, and you literally just right around the seedling, and then you'll probably want to grab a big spoon. I'll show you with my hand, but a big spoon would be better. Just scoop out your seedling and plant it in. So this is kind of a 1-2 punch. So the other benefit of doing this is that because there's wool on the bottom of this tray, that wool is going to work its way into the roots. The roots of your seedlings will kind of intertwine with that wool. When you take this up, it'll all come up together, plant it right into your garden, and bam, your plant is fertilized for the season. You probably will not have to fertilize until August or so, if at all. So you're kind of knocking about a couple birds with one stone. You're seed starting, you're fertilizing. Let me know, guys, if you're going to be trying these. And then remember, I've got that link down below with the downloadable PDF plans for the different dimensions for these trays. Let me know if you're going to give it a shot. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. We'll see you around here next time at the farm.